a lot of composers, like old composers from hundreds of years ago, have horrible stories, tragic stories behind them, and they never got famous and artists and stuff. But their music is brilliant and fine today, and everybody loves it.
Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Who Cares Anyway podcast. My guest on this episode is Patty Stirling, or P. Stirl, to use her pen name / handle as a writer with Puncture. Now, it wasn't until early 2019 when I first came across an issue of Puncture, so pretty far into the writing / research for the book. I was helping someone sift through some old boxes of memorabilia and whatnot and came across issue 5 of Puncture, which, among other things, included features on Toiling Midgets and Flipper, both of whom were referred to at that point in the past tense, suggesting that they had broken up. And evidently that did seem to be the case at that point, late 1983. But I was able to take some photos, some scans of a few pages, but I didn't have the full magazine, and so all I could see at the bottom of these articles that I had scanned was P. Stirl, P-S-T-I-R-L, and I thought, well, who is this? Later that year, later 2019, lo and behold, the first 6 issues of Puncture were republished in an anthology, Puncture, the first 6 issues, and so I bought that and discovered P. Stirl was indeed Patty Stirling, and that she had done a lot of other writing that was definitely relevant to what I was looking at in the book. She was writing about what we can call the hardcore era, even if not all the music in Puncture was hardcore by any means. Now, this interview you were about to hear was actually conducted in 2 sessions or installments. We did the first one, and I realized in listening back to it that there were some questions I'd asked that didn't really connect. And there were some other questions I could have asked and didn't. So the second time we talked, I went back and had a chance to ask some of those questions. One of those questions, or a series of questions, had to do with venues and basically places in San Francisco during that period, say 82 to 84, 85. And it's kind of unintentionally funny in that I keep asking about places and she keeps saying, no, I didn't really like that place. But through the course of that little segment, we do still get a nice little tour of some of the venues, whether it's the Sound of Music, the Tool and Die, on Broadway, the Stone, etc. I think what comes through in this interview is something that I also picked up on and appreciated in Patty Stirling's writing for Puncture, and that is her honesty. I never get the sense that she is posturing or really mincing words. Certainly was enthusiastic about the music that she was enthusiastic about, but if she didn't like something, she would say so. And I appreciate that. She was by no means a careerist or someone who was looking to necessarily make a name for herself. She just had something to say about this music in this particular time, and she did so, and did so in a way that I found very helpful. I will include a link in the show notes where you can find the book, Puncture, the first 6 issues, but you can also just go ahead and search Puncture, the first 6 issues, and you'll probably be able to find it. But again, thank you to Patty Stirling for this interview, and I'll go ahead and get out of the way here.
Well, I was born in San Diego. My family lived there till I was 10 in North County, but we had pretty much to leave because my dad couldn't hold down a job. He was a pretty bad alcoholic, and he decided to buy some land. He got some really cheap land in Cave Junction, Oregon, a tiny town in Southern Oregon. And I had animals, and we lived in the woods pretty much till I was 16. And his drunkenness, he was a very bad drunk, and I don't know how he got any money, but from his family, I think. But I just started fighting with him constantly, and I couldn't really run away because there's nowhere to run to. And I finally forced my mom to get to divorce him and get out of there. And he was selling the land and leaving anyway. I have brothers and sisters. So my mother and I started moving, and we went to San Luis Obispo. And meanwhile, I got anorexia nervosa pretty bad and major depression. And my father moved to Coos Bay, Oregon with my siblings. And I made her move back up there. And that's when I was the sickest. And I ran away from home once. And I went to the hospital a few times. And then we moved to, I think I moved to Eugene, Oregon, and stayed with family friends for a while. And then moved to Grants Pass, where my mother had moved to, and stayed with her and graduated from high school there. I went to 5 different high schools. It was sort of all over the place.
Wow.
Then, and then she moved to San Jose. So I followed her down there and ended up in San Francisco instead in 1978. And I worked as a cook and went to the Art Institute part-time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Then I think it says in the intro of the book. Yeah, I was like painting. I always painted. I always did art late at night mostly. And I listened to some radio. I lived like on Russian Hill with a flatmate. And a radio show played an album every night at midnight. And one night they played Patti Smith album. And I completely flipped. I thought, oh my God. Like I said, I felt like I was looking in a mirror for the first time. And it absolutely changed me. I mean, it affected me so much. I think I just turned into a punk at that moment. And then I quit my job and I flew to London, and I walked around looking at punk things in 78 in London. Then I went to Switzerland, and I came back and ended up in, I think I was in Solana Beach. I just moved everywhere. It was horrible because I stayed with family friends and things. And then I went to Australia after living in Solana Beach and working at McDonald's a little bit. I went to Australia, to Melbourne, to visit a friend who I'd known in one of my high schools, Australian guy who was an exchange student and who had named me P. Stirl.
Oh, okay.
And I went to Sydney and looked at the weird punk stores, punk fashion stores in Sydney. Then I went out back and I came back. Let me see. I flew back to LA and I think I ended up in Coos Bay again with my dad, at my dad's house. But I moved out and lived on the campus of a community college and went to school for a year doing art and French and writing and stuff like that. Just dorky community college. That was about 1980, I think. And school was over. I didn't know what to do. There were no jobs at all. So I joined the Air Force. I passed the test and was accepted into Air Force intelligence. My sister did the same thing. But when I went to Portland, I took the bus to Portland to get ready to go to boot camp. And I had to sign all these papers and do all this health stuff. And I was shocked, and I realized when I read the papers they wanted me to sign, I just said, no way, I'm getting out of here. And especially with my anorexia and everything, and I had and insomnia and all that too. I thought, this is not the place for me. So I said, sorry. And they sent me back to Coos Bay. And meanwhile, my mom was in San Jose still. So I went back down there and started working at a branch of the same restaurant I'd been working in San Francisco, the Good Earth. And then started writing for started going to shows. I lived downtown. I moved away from my mom and lived downtown San Jose and near the university. And I went to free shows at the university. I saw U2, which was boring. And I saw some punk shows and I totally loved them and I thrashed and I had fun. And then I met a guy, Tim Tanuka, who was doing the Ripper magazine. And I started writing reviews for him. And he took me to San Francisco to the MAB to see a Black Flag show. And he introduced me to Henry Rollins. And I thought, this is so cool. I love this punk scene at the MAB and everything. And I started driving up from San Jose every week to go to Dead Kennedys shows. And I said, this is stupid. I'm going to live here. So I found an ad for the Art Institute, from the Art Institute, a woman looking for a flatmate in Lower Nob Hill on the Polk Street side. So I moved there and then started working at the same restaurant I'd worked at before, the Good Earth in North Beach or North Point, and going to punk shows constantly because it wasn't that far from the MAB. And then I was there ever since. Then we started a bunch of connections, got me to meet, it's in that book, in the intro, got me to meet Katherine, and we started the magazine. And she didn't go out to shows very much at all. But I was always going out, and I started taking pictures mostly a lot and writing reviews. And I felt absolutely crazy about, I got away from like hardcore punk and got more into the sort of the rough trade scene, rough trade records with English stuff, British stuff, and reggae, dub, stuff like that, and Crass, English bands, a lot of English bands, and local. I was completely in love with the Toiling Midgets, and I loved Flipper too. But Flipper got really popular. People came to see them, flocked to see them eventually. The Toiling Midgets,
the Sleeping Midgets,
I know, never got nearly as popular. I felt that there was something rather unstable about them and their past and everything. I'm not sure why. I guess the drug thing. I don't know for a fact anything, but the bands always got reputations, like Flipper, of course, and Toiling Midgets, they got that reputation. But when Aaron Gregory became the bass player, he seemed really approachable to me. So I finally sort of hooked into them through him to be able to write about them and learn more about them. But I was terrified of meeting any of them, sort of. I knew stuff about it.
Right. So you kind of got there and saw them during the Ricky era, but then after Ricky, probably more after Ricky was singing with them.
Well, he was there like off and on. He'd sing with them sometimes and sometimes not. And I sort of got fed up with him. And I knew he was a really wonderful, he had an incredible golden voice, gorgeous voice. And with the Sleepers, listening to old Sleepers records, he could actually sing a whole song, sort of. But it felt like when he tried to sing with the Toiling Midgets, everything just sort of failed. His voice, he couldn't, he had this gorgeous voice, but he couldn't compose anything with it, really. Maybe it was just over time, he was falling apart.
So this anthology does the first 6 issues, but before it relocated to Portland and before you stopped writing for it, there were still other issues. And I guess I was curious, what was the decision behind only doing the first 6 issues? Like what?
That's a good. I think. Well, that Steve Connell, who worked for Rough Trade, and they ended up getting married. He pretty much took over as the editor, well, co-editor with her, except he always called her the editor because he probably didn't want to make her mad. He said she was the boss. And he had amazing technical and editing and connection skills and ads and everything. He's just an all-around brilliant guy. He pretty much stepped in after the 6th issue, I think. And we started, instead of doing it by hand and at her office, printing at the office building, at her office building downtown. And we started using commercial printers more. And I started traveling an awful lot. So I was not there a couple of nights a week, a couple of days a week, like I used to be when I was just being good and staying home. And they lived together, so they were there full time. And I would usually just start sending stuff from overseas, sending work from overseas. So that's, I think, when he moved in and started taking charge, he sort of wanted to throw the rest in the throw the previous stuff in the garbage because it wasn't that great compared to what he could do. But instead of doing that, he decided just to print out the book.
So it sounds like it changed in a few different ways. Changed visually, changed in terms of the contents.
And the cost of making it and stuff.
Cost of making it. Okay.
Yeah, they sort of invested and got a lot more ads and were able to pay for stuff more. He was sort of the businessman behind it all.
It was a fairly small operation, Puncture, compared to something like Maxim Rock and Roll.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just, they had like a crowd, I think. And they had like radio and tons of, I don't know, punks help. They were like, I don't know, a community or something, a big community. Well, we were just real small and just pretty much the two of us and just like a few more people that like Neo and Maddie and Alan that had really nothing to do with that hardcore scene. And I can see why they had those sort of boring reviews, because you get just absolutely buried with CDs and records and things to review, tapes and stuff that want to be reviewed. You get them in the mail. And so they were probably trying to be fair and review everything. So they would just whip out anything about them. Say they'd listen to it for 2 minutes and say, this sounds like so and such and such. This sounds like such and such. Yeah, because we really got buried too. But
you wouldn't just dutifully go through everything. It was a matter of picking out what you actually cared about.
Yes.
Were there specific influences, like writers that you liked, whether they were music writers or other kinds of writers?
Writers. I never thought about anything when I wrote, anybody or anything. I just sort of sat late at night with a notebook and spewed out words like a therapy or something. But my favorite writer at the time was probably Anthony Burgess, if that means anything.
Well, how much writing had you done before Puncture?
I'd written some reviews for Ripper magazine, and that was about it. But I was always sort of a good writer, I guess. And when I was growing up in school, the teachers would sit me in the back of the class and make me write stories while they were teaching grammar to the other kids, stuff like that.
Okay, but it wasn't something that you
And I'd been pursuing now. I was always into fine art, oil painting, art, sculpture, things like that. And I never really, it's like suddenly when I moved to San Francisco, I started trading my art for writing little by little and started doing writing and writing all the time compulsively. Well, before I'd been doing painting and sculpture and stuff.
Was there any sort of national community or regional community that you felt any sort of kinship with in terms of, either other publications or places where you all had communication with people or any kind of larger audience? Or how did you feel that you related in any broader sense like that, if that question makes any sense?
Um, yeah, it does. Um, I don't really think so. Not at the time that I was writing for it, mostly. Up until like the 7th issue or 8th issue. And then I started traveling so much that I wasn't really there. And that's when um, uh, Katherine married Steve. Steve and Katherine got married, and he pretty much took over. Then it got really a college radio lean, and they were reviewing songs and stuff and with writers that became serious writers eventually. And I didn't really know anything about the music they were writing, but a lot of other people did, and I was more and more distanced. But when I was there, I guess maybe like, I know in Australia, we had a lot of fans in Australia and some writers from Australia, Sydney, because they have an absolutely amazing punk scene going on down there. Not hardcore scene at all, just an absolute weird scene, unlike anything I'd seen in the US.
Was that SPK a part of that?
SBK might have been, but I guess I'm thinking a lot of, well, a birthday party, of course.
Okay.
And what was the one after birthday party? Good old Nick Cave.
Oh, the Cave and the Bad Seeds. Okay.
Bad Seeds, yeah. And I don't know. I went there and I saw tons of local bands, very weird local bands in Sydney. And then there were the pop bands that were my friends, like the Cananes and Rabbit's Wedding. Cananes are always had a good following, and they're still doing stuff now. But I don't know if we ever had, maybe Flipper, because Paula was girlfriend of Bruce Luce,
right?
And so we had that sort of family connection with them, and it wasn't very good, unfortunately. Katherine, of course, all angry and worried all the time.
Paula, I gather that you and Paula were roughly the same age, and then she was involved with Black Humor at the time, and but they were more of a recording project than a live band, or did they play live much?
They played live a little, and that's when she was mostly involved, I think, because she was a vocalist, and I think she played bass. I'm not sure. And then they became Nimbus.
Okay.
Which I think toured more. Yeah, Black Humor had this weird guy. I can't remember his name. Bald guy, older.
They were another one who, were they were hardcore, the hardcore era, but very different music.
Oh God, they were different.
Yeah.
They were very strange. Good for them.
And then other people have told me that Paula was a big influence on Courtney Love.
Oh God, yes.
But what can you tell people about Paula or her creative side or her music in that period? Were you two pretty good friends?
Oh God, it was really, it was hard, very hard, because I was there all the time, and often, when she wasn't living somewhere else, she was crashing out at Catherine's apartment. And Katherine and I were sort of doing a business. And Paula was there. Paula was her daughter. And I didn't know how to treat her. And she was usually having a very rough time. And Katherine they were often fighting. And I didn't know how to take a side or just to stay out of it. And Paula was obviously not on that good terms because of what she was doing, her health and everything. And so we didn't become, we were acquaintances but I didn't know what to think about. I felt sorry for her a lot of the time, but I also got really angry and impatient with her a lot of the time. Sometimes I felt like she was acting like an immature brat. Other times I thought she was being abused by her mom. I don't know. A lot of times I thought she was in real trouble and she needed help. I didn't know how Katherine could help her. And probably Katherine didn't know either. And but after Katherine died, and even before, I don't know, before she died, Paula and I contacted a lot more and talked a lot more, like online, by email and stuff. And we're pretty good friends now. No distant. She lives up in Portland. I feel bad for her having to live up in Portland because I didn't like living there. And Courtney Love. Oh yeah. I remember one day I came in and Courtney Love and Paula were sitting on the floor in the living room while we were trying to work, and they were giggling and acting weird. And I thought, this woman, this Courtney Love woman, is the most annoying person I've ever met, and she's making Paula worse. And I wonder how long she's going to be staying there. I think she stayed there for a while, but I don't know. That's all I can think of right now.
One thing I didn't ask you about was a few of the different, let's say, venues or places. And I don't know, I'm just kind of have a short informal list. You could tell me maybe like what you remember or anything that comes to mind. One would be, well, the Tool and Die.
I never went there. It was on Valencia Street, I think, but I never went there. I think it was sort of mostly pre-me, sort of. It was mostly happening. I don't know, even though my friends talk about it a lot. It's something I never went to.
Was the Broadway more central in terms of where you were seeing shows?
Yeah, early on, yeah.
Yeah, so there was the On Broadway and the Mabuhay, and it seems like the On Broadway would have the bigger shows at that point.
I remember it seemed like in the early 80s, the MAB was like sort of the only place where punks were playing. And then suddenly the On Broadway punks and more shows were playing. That's what it seemed to me, or maybe I just wasn't aware of it. It was ridiculous, but all of a sudden everything moved to the On Broadway too. And yeah, the On Broadway was sort of classier, and the MAB was dirty punk. But On Broadway would have cool, visiting bands that weren't punk. Like I saw Violent Femmes there. I'm not sure who else. Well, I saw a lot of people there, but Violent Femmes, that sort of band.
Okay, and then across the street was the Stone, and
yeah.
the way I've heard it described is basically there was the punk side of the street and the metal side of the street, uh, in a sense where the punk bands would play either on Broadway or in the Mabuhay, and then the Stone would be either hair bands or the beginnings of the Metallica kind of thrash scene.
Well, yeah, it was Bill Graham place, and everybody hated Bill Graham, especially me. And but it was weird. And I became SST bands would always play there. And I was always, it sort of made me mad at SST for always playing at the Bill Graham place. And it made me also think, yeah, well, SST can keep their LA thrashers over there, their deadly LA thrashers down there over at the Stone, and not send them over to MAB where they hurt people.
So what about the vats? Did you ever
No,
spend any time there?
I was not a vat rat or anything. I never went there, but I knew a lot of people that did. I'm pretty, the whole time I was living there, I felt like I was a pretty, what would you call it? Sort of straight girl or something. Sort of like Catherine. It's like we both like didn't do drugs and go out and get drunk and hang out with the vat rats and stuff. And I was always sort of like that. I didn't ever go wild. And I always felt sort of like a wuss about it, or a nerd. Maybe I was more of a nerd. I don't know, but not as much of a nerd as she was.
What about the farm? Was that a
And the
little weird?
farm was something I really didn't want anything to do with because it was all peace punk, not peace punk, but it was the biker, the messenger. My friend, I have a friend who used to be a messenger back then, and he was at the farm all the time, and the kind of bands that played at the farm I had no interest in, and I wasn't really into a communal sort of neo hippie scene. The only time I ever went to the farm was because I guess Mark Pauline had a studio, had a studio there, a warehouse where he made his huge machines that that destroyed things. And I went, and William Burroughs had a birthday party there one night. So a friend and I went down there, and I thought it was fabulous, seeing all Mark Pauline's machines up close and everything. But that was all I ever did about the farm. I guess I'm a bit of a snob about that. Yeah, my friend is a completely different than me. Anyway.
Yeah, well, the farm was before my time, but I visited Subterranean, and at some point, I don't know if it was late 80s that they moved into that general vicinity. I believe, well, let's say at 82, 83, their headquarters was on Valencia. Well, there's a little bit in the book about that, people talking about working there, and there was a storefront, but it wasn't like a major
I sort of remember that in the early 80s.
Okay, yeah, and then they relocated. So when I first interviewed Steve Tupper, it was 2004, and that was at the Subterranean warehouse. And I went back there in 2016, just kind of wandered in, and still there. I'm not sure about today, but yeah, it was in that area, and from what I understood, the farm was right next to that. And then
Hospital.
yeah,
General Hospital.
right. Yeah. Now let's see. What about the East Bay Ruthie's?
Ruthie's Inn?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think let me see. I went to the Stone that's over there, Keystone, Berkeley. Okay. I think that was the only place. I went there a few times. I saw the Mekons there once. Then oh no, the Keystone and the Keystone in Palo Alto. There's another one, and I saw Neil Young play there. Yeah, Neil Young and his entire band. Because my boyfriend dragged me there. I saw Neil Young at another time when he played solo with a vocoder, and I thought that was fabulous, fantastic. I think that was in San Francisco. But Keystone, Keystone Palo Alto, I saw.
That was when he had done the Trans album.
Yeah, I saw him.
Yeah.
I thought that was in San Francisco. I think it was the Keystone in Palo Alto where I saw him and the whole band. So I saw him twice.
Was the 10th Street Hall?
I went to 10th Street Hall once, I think. I'm not sure who I saw there. I went to later on, I used to go to Graffiti a lot. I liked that place a lot on Valencia. Sound of Music, of course.
Oh, right. Okay.
I went there several times. I loved that place. It was a storefront in the Tenderloin in a very sort of the grossest area in San Francisco. Still is really gross. I remember seeing the Gun Club there, and it was such a good show.
What about Club Foot and other stuff down
Um,
in that part of town?
no, Club Foot, that was on Third Street.
Yeah, yeah.
I was only there once. I didn't hang out there at all because it was sort of far away. You had to take the 15 bus. It was a long drive. And I only went there once with some friends to see Trial and Crucifix.
How did that fit into things from your perspective?
Yeah, that was my crass side with Maddie Lyon and her rough trade thing, and she was into that crass band movement, crass label. And Trial was, I'm not sure if they were on, not sure what label they were on, but Crucifix played with them sometimes, and they were on a Crass label, or they were supported by Crass or something like that. Yeah, Crucifix was great.
They were both younger, and a lot of them were from the East Bay, right?
Yeah,
Is that yeah?
yeah. So they were. I think some of Crucifix worked at this restaurant in this famous restaurant in Berkeley. They were cooks there. I can't remember the name of it now. It's a big famous place. And I wasn't really that interested in Trial that much, except that I liked the idea that they were this peace punk band.
Yeah.
But I loved Crucifix music, and they all dressed in black, and Neo and Maddie and all the Crass people dressed in black, and they tried to be vegetarians and stuff, but I did lots of drugs anyway, stuff like that. I don't know if Trial did drugs or Crucifix, probably not, but other people I'm thinking of. But Trial was the kind of band that, I mean, their sound was one thing, but their content their content was very sort of serious, sort of political, very serious political they took themselves very seriously. And I think that's one thing that you can't really get that excited. I don't know. I couldn't get excited about them that way.
Did you feel like the Midgets took? I mean, the Midgets weren't.
No, the
They got a lot of
Midgets.
humor, but how would you? How do you see them in that light as far as
I
how they?
always thought that they were absolutely lost in their amazing creativity, and they might take themselves seriously, but they were really, I thought they were like composers, or like gorgeous composers. That their music was sort of magical when it came out, when it would come out when they were playing, and that's what they'd like to do, to create like that. I think they were just real art. They're just artists. And incredibly unique that way. And that's why Ricky wasn't really that necessary with them. I think they were real artists.
Yeah, I mean there was a lot going on at this time. I don't know. I was trying to kind of put a bow on it or figure out a way to sort of orient or frame things because Puncture is not a.
Punk
It says a
magazine.
magazine of punk culture, as it says,
Yeah.
but at the same time, at least in San Francisco, you had Rough Trade, you had Veil and Research, you had Maximum Rock and Roll, Hardcore. Flipper was their own kind of thing. The Midgets, their own kind of thing. And in some ways, these different things could overlap a little bit, but in other ways, it seems like they were all their own little orbits.
Oh yeah. That's why I felt sort of odd about my position, because I wasn't a member of any particular scene at all. I was drawn to all these different things.
And there was no such thing as a puncture scene, I guess.
No, of course not, because Puncture was Catherine, and Catherine was not easily approachable, and she didn't really go out and do stuff and meet things. And she sort of had her own personal life. She wasn't a punk at all, a punk rocker or anything. A punk, like I was a punk pretty much, I thought. But she was just a writer. She pretty much just wanted to have her own magazine. And because her daughter was a musician with punk bands and everything. And I think she figured that was the new big happening thing. So she wanted to do the magazine about that. And that's why she needed somebody like me. Even though I was not a big scenester like she probably wanted, but she went out and got other writers, tons of more. She made connections with more people. She did a good job of contacting radio stations, and after she quit her job, especially, and lived off of the savings from her motorcycle crash. The not the savings, the
Right.
award for her
Right.
motorcycle crash.
Did you ever wonder, apart from what you just told me as an explanation for it, but like why of all things she was doing like a punk magazine as opposed to a cooking magazine or an architecture magazine?
Oh God.
Did it seem like she actually did like the music, or was it more like she's sort of perplexed, fascinated by this culture? Or
She came from a background of being sort of a political activist, very leftist and Marxist and everything. She was married and lived in Manhattan like for a long time, I guess. Well, during the 60s. And I think that's when Paula, her daughter, was born. And they had like a lot of Paula told me that they'd have a lot of political people come by and cool people and everything. And they were sort of a trendy household. And then when she got divorced, she hooked up with and she worked for Penthouse magazine, maybe after she got divorced. So she knew about working at a magazine, and she ended up running off with a journalist in England who was a sports journalist, motorcycles specifically, and that's where she got into motorcycles. And her son, she had a son, and he died in a motorcycle accident in England. And I think that's when they that's when she moved back to the United States. But instead of going to New York, to Manhattan, she moved to San Francisco to try to start over again. And I think from living in New York and her experience there and her political views and everything made her sort of lean toward the new reactionary stuff going on in San Francisco, and that punk rock, and that her daughter was involved. That seemed to be a movement that appealed to her a bit, though she didn't really want to get involved exactly with she just wanted to be the editor and not a participant too much.
It strikes me as it's a strange perspective to have, or just a different perspective to have. But on the other
No
hand,
kidding.
on the other hand, there were other people who were quite a bit older than
Yeah.
Tim Yohannan
Oh
was
yeah,
older.
Tim Yohannan, for goodness sake.
Vail was older.
Mhm.
Whatnot. So yeah, and then even even in the very early Mabuhay days, a lot of the bands were Crime with 1977. Most of
Sure.
those guys, they were almost 30, most of them, and that's true too with with television. That realizing that Tom Verlaine was 73. You kind of do the math and realize that
Yeah.
he was almost 30. So
Almost a generation older than me. Well, than us. Well,
yeah, so yeah, it didn't really start to get really young until it seems like until hardcore. I mean, well, some of the bands were young. The Sleepers were pretty young. Negative Trend, those guys were young, and late teens for the most part in the late 70s. But yeah, it wasn't a youth. Yeah, you didn't have that real. Uh, Again, from what I gather, and until really the hardcore, and it became more of a suburban thing that was
yeah,
reaching wider, as opposed to
suburban
the
male mostly.
yeah. As far as like making it challenging for women to participate, either as far as as musicians or just as observers, is it fair to say that hardcore had a negative influence on that, or pushed women into other areas?
Yeah, I think so. Personally, that's how I felt at the time, a lot. And I always blamed LA for it at the time. Los Angeles, assholes. They come up here and they kept, and it's mostly because of brute physical strength of them getting up, of these big men, big guys, skinheads coming in and being extremely violent on the stage, on the dance floor. And so it wasn't just women that were pushed out. It was guys that didn't want to be violent too. But I felt like it was a lot women, because you didn't see many women in the bands either, too.
Right.
So I just didn't take it seriously. I stopped taking it seriously at all. I had nothing to say about them.
Yeah, but at the same time, there you were at the Eastern Front, and at least checking in on some of this.
Some of the bands were great.
So it was a matter of drawing a distinction between,
Oh
or
yeah.
some of the bands versus the overall crowd.
Um,
Would that be a way to characterize it, or
that's a really good way. That's a really good, interesting. Hmm. I guess the crowd that they would attract. And a lot of it was, maybe it was just, maybe I was taking it extremely personally, because I used to be able to go into the MAB and pogo like crazy, and people would help each other get up and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden everything changed when these hardcore LA bands came up. And most of the people started standing back. the locals standing back instead. So I just grew very angry at them.
So Puncture moved up to Portland, and you were no longer writing for them at that point. Is that?
I was just very rarely writing. I would send articles from overseas, wherever I was. I would send show reviews or scene reviews or something, like a feature on Zimbabwe and stuff on New Zealand and Australia and the Philippines, even in China. And then when after the 90s, I didn't really travel anymore. But they were in Portland, and I eventually moved to Portland. I eventually moved up there, but I really didn't connect. Well, I connected with them. I saw them and visited them a lot, but I didn't really do much writing. And they just pretty much closed up. And because Steve was fluent in German, and he did projects of translating for publishers, of translating books into German and stuff like that, or German into English. And he wanted to start his own publishing company and publish books on music. And then eventually they started doing crime fiction and stuff. That's still going, Verse Chorus Press. And a lot of old Puncture writers have books published on it, actually. Some of the old Puncture writers ended up quite well off as writers. But anyway, I probably went off what you asked me.
Well, I didn't really give you. I guess let me actually try to ask a proper question, because I'm looking at this 1986 thing that you wrote on Subterranean, where you interviewed Steve Tupper. And I was trying to figure out, obviously, clearly you were still writing for Puncture in 1986. I'm not sure if Puncture was still based in San Francisco in 1986, or when it relocated. But anyway, but also there in this article, obviously you had been following things pretty closely for several years at that point. And then in the article, Steve Tupper himself is saying things. Let me just read a quotation from him from this interview. I actually cited this in the book. He says, "Punk has degenerated severely. 1986 is to 1977 as 1975 was to 1967. That is, just as the hippies degenerated into boring nothingness by the mid-70s, the punks have now gone the same way. A lot of people are just waiting for something new." I don't know. So I guess maybe I could throw that out. Does that seem like he was being overly pessimistic, or did it seem to you like there was less interesting stuff happening?
Oh, I agree with him. I mean, now in retrospect, I agree with him completely, and that's why I was so distanced from then on.
Okay.
But I felt like it had a lot to do with how easy it was for anybody to record anything anymore because of CDs, how easy it was to record CDs. And so anybody could record anything. And so a lot of mash got put out there, and it was so easy to get a show and anyone could do it. And so nobody really tried that hard, and people stopped trying so hard, or when the internet came, it's like, forget it. But anyway, what were you saying?
Oh yeah, well, because but that's definitely true. But at that point, in say 1986, it seemed like, again, at that point, I'm 11 years old, but I don't know anything about like current music scenes. But it just seemed like there was a certain amount of burnout at that point. Flipper, they're basically broken up, doing occasional shows. Toiling Midgets are done. A lot of even bands like Black Flag are on their last legs.
Probably Jello Biafra is out on his own.
Right, that's the 86 is the year the Dead Kennedys broke up, and then Subterranean was sort of, I guess the tone of that article was that he was sort of exasperated and sort of worn out from just basically the diminishing returns of running a label and not finding as much exciting music to get behind. I mean, you also had a lot of metal coming along at that time. He talks in that article about being into some rap music that was coming out.
Mhm.
But I don't know if I guess I was trying to figure out the timeline as far as when you stopped writing for Puncture or stopped writing about music. Was that more to do with the fact that Puncture relocated, or more that there was less music that was exciting or interesting to you? Or because
I
again, I
think
haven't really been able to follow your writing past the end of the anthology, which kind of ends in 84. Anyway,
uh-huh.
sorry, I cut you.
Yeah, well, most of the writing I did after that was overseas, sending stuff from overseas. And yeah, I there was less stuff. There was definitely, I think, less music that I was interested in. There was nothing I could get excited about anymore, it felt like. And they hadn't, I don't think they'd relocated quite yet. And Steve and Catherine were running Puncture with a lot of new writers, and they were covering a lot of music. But it's like music. They did another book called, uh, now I can't remember the name of it. It was a Puncture book about the rest of the issues and
Okay.
the rest of the people writing about it. It had an interesting name, but I can't remember. But I was not, the music that they were covering and they wanted covered, I couldn't care about it all. I just was not interested in it. I kept thinking this is college radio, or like, I don't know. And so I just I liked rap, and I felt like I can't write about rap in Puncture. And um, I kept going away. I kept going overseas. I just drifted away. And a lot of people still liked Puncture a lot, and a lot of writers kept writing for them, and new writers came and were really excited about them. But they were people I had absolutely nothing in common with. And I felt sort of bad, but I also felt like, well, I didn't fight very hard for this. I just sort of deserted ship. that sounds awful.
That's it's relatable in the sense that it would be. I've never been able to really like get into just writing a lot of content about music to write a lot of content about music. I have to get behind something. I have to be interested in it because
Right, right.
there's
Okay.
not, it's not something, there was a brief time in the early 2000s when I was freelancing somewhat, pretty actively and writing reviews and stuff. But I realized pretty early on that it's still not close to something you could make a living on. I would have two jobs. I would do that, and then I would do like tutoring, and eventually started teaching. And so it was not something that I saw as realistic to like make money. But then I also was like, after I stopped doing that, I was like, oh, I can actually listen to music that I like that doesn't have to be new
Uh-huh.
music. and
Yeah.
and then I can sort of follow these other pathways and not worry about the fact that I have unpopular tastes, or
Okay.
not have to or or niche taste or something like that. And
Yeah.
that's this book is a lot about that, or was definitely a result of that. Because if I'd been trying to keep up with new releases or sort of manufacture enthusiasm for the flavor of
Oh,
the month, it would have been impossible to dig
I
deep in.
know.
But yeah, I see this article here from Willamette Week. It says
Yeah.
Portland-based Puncture magazine upped the game for punk rock zines. A new anthology shows how. And then their subheader says it was the first to write about Guided by Voices, Jeff Buckley, and Neutral Milk Hotel. And so it's like, okay, that's like 90s, like big name indie rock.
I know.
And
Yeah.
but I see exactly what you're saying, because like the even mid to late '80s, that era when you say college radio and college rock, it's kind of the era when it was becoming more business like, and certain people
Oh, yeah.
were well suited to that, and functioned well in that CMJ college radio world. But for a lot of other people, it's just like, this isn't what I got into this for. I'm not a professional punk or a professional, um, whatever you call it. And
Career something.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, career,
Career
yeah,
songwriter
yeah.
person. You had to start doing BMI and all that.
So it's kind of funny to see, Portland-based puncture, and here I am asking you about this very specific era in San Francisco that is not. I mean, it's almost like a footnote in that article about puncture. And
Mm,
did you continue to do other writing after
no.
puncture? Okay,
No writing at all.
okay.
I did what everyone does and try to write some fiction and things like that, or travelogue, stuff like that. But that's not really much. But yeah, I know what you mean about now you can listen to the kind of music you want and be drawn to. And like, for example, right now I'm really drawn to a radio station in Australia, Castlemaine, New South Wales, Castlemaine, Victoria, that puts out different shows. And there's one specific show that's Aboriginal music, like current Aboriginal music, like bands and stuff, that is absolutely my favorite. And so I'm listening to Aboriginal rock bands and country bands and things like that. And I just find them fascinating and really, really good. And
Do you still listen to? Is there any stuff from, say, the early mid '80s? And again, not to keep, I guess I keep coming back to that era, but that still sticks with you, or that, is a lot of that music more stuff that you experienced live as opposed to stuff that you go back to on record?
I think you're right about that. Live, the Mekons are one band that I keep getting their records and liking to. Keep getting their recordings. And Birthday Party. Well, it's not San Francisco really, but other people. Nick Cave from other places like England. Stuff that I really loved back then. San Francisco, not really. I just really kept up with the Toiling Midgets because of Paul Hood being on Facebook, and I've bought some of their stuff on Bandcamp, and I wanted to go see them last year, and I was going to go see them when they played in San Diego, and I got incredibly sick. I had just, like, a few days earlier, I'd taken my mom to the emergency room because she had like 105 fever and she was delirious. And she ended up having some horrible, well, it was really hot too. It was record heat in San Diego. She ended up having intestinal weird problems or something. And then a few days later, I got really sick with a 105 fever.
Oh, wow.
And just sick. My stomach and intestines were just ravaged. And there was no way I could go to the show. It was horrible. I was so angry that I had gotten so sick that I couldn't go see the Toiling Midgets for the first time in like 40 years.
So you never saw them during the early '90s period? I don't know if you said you were back
I
and
don't think
forth.
so.
Yeah. They had a brief period when Mark Eitzel was singing with them, and then even Ricky came back. They did the same kind of thing where they would play instrumental, and they'd have a singer. The singer would go, but they did start to bring Ricky back, or he was playing shows with them, and it was a night after a show that he died.
It was in the 90s.
It was 1992,
That he died, huh?
November 1992.
Okay.
They had just gotten back. Well, he had just rejoined. They had had a record come out that year with Mark Eitzel on it, but by the time the record came out, he was no longer in the band, and he
Yeah.
was, I didn't quite realize, he had a lot of critical acclaim. He had been named like
Yeah.
Songwriter of the Year in Rolling Stone in 1991, and American Music Club was
Mhm.
signed to or about to be signed to a major label, and so, that probably helped, at least helped get them the Toiling Midgets signed to the label that they were signed to, Matador. But at the same time, it didn't really help, like, especially when that record comes
He
out
wasn't
and
going to
then
stay with them, obviously.
he's not on the tour, and then it kind of obscures like from what they were doing. And then so yeah, they were going to have Ricky. He did do some shows with them, and there's one recording. They did some recordings with him as well in that period, and then yeah, he had he overdosed that night after the show, and it was like November 1992.
Okay.
And so yeah, it's a sad story. I should it seems like at every point, uh, it's almost like the curse of Ricky.
Yeah.
That kind of touched everything that
I've heard that a lot.
that he touched, and to the
Yeah.
point where I almost started to wonder if it was, it was contagious enough that I was getting some of it through, because
No, no.
I worked with Michael, and we had found a publisher, um, for that, and then
Was that?
right, but before that, there was the Feral House, and Adam Parfrey was interested in publishing it, and Michael knew Adam Parfrey from at some point. Oddly enough, Adam Parfrey had managed the Toiling Midgets back in the early '80s, so small world. But
Mhm.
anyway, he was interested, and he had talked to Michael on the phone, and I had emailed with him a little bit, and then the next thing we know, it goes silent. And then next thing we know, we found out that he had had a stroke and died.
Oh dear.
Yeah, so that was, and then when that happened, I thought, this is really for real.
Yeah.
Like, all the stories Michael told me about, this, we almost had this happen, and then this happened, and that's kind of like the running theme throughout the book. And there is maybe some truth to the idea that to some extent, you make your own luck, but um, in another sense, sometimes it really does feel like there's almost a curse that has carried through. Um, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how literally I mean that, but
Yeah, I know. That sort of keeps feeding and feeding and taking.
yeah. But I think it's, I think there's something to be said for. I don't know. I think a lot of those guys were the, they're the real deal, and I think things don't come easy to people who are. I don't know. They're not. None of them. Here I'm talking about like the Sleepers and really Flipper, Negative Trend, Toiling Midgets. That whole group of bands that there's a lot of rough stuff that's happened, but um, they were. I don't know, the essence that comes out of that music, even though if there wasn't a whole lot of it that made it on record, I think it's unique in that era, and
Well,
it's always been kind of under recognized.
well, that's sort of what a lot of composers, like old composers from hundreds of years ago, have horrible stories, tragic stories behind them, and they never got famous, and artists and stuff. But their music is brilliant and fine today, and everybody loves it. But their personal existence was a nightmare, and they were never able to go that far. And maybe that's what people like the Toiling Midgets are going to be like.